Chapter 3 Concerning Parsley Beds Part 1 The red rose was nearly finished, and Pat suddenly remembered that Judy had said something about rooting in the parsley bed. "Judy Plum," she said, "what do you think you'll find in the parsley bed?" "What would ye be after thinking if I told ye you'd find a tiny wee new baby there?" asked Judy, watching her sharply. Pat looked for a moment as if she had rather had the wind knocked out of her. Then, "Do you think, Judy, that we really need another baby here?" Oh, as to that, a body might have her own opinion. But wouldn't it be nice now? A house without a baby do be a lonesome sort of place, I'm thinking. Would you like a baby better than me, Judy Plum?" There was a tremble in Pat's voice. "That I wouldn't, me jewel. Ye're Judy's girl, and Judy's girl you'll be forever if I was finding a dozen babies in the parsley bed. It do be your mother I'm thinking of. The fact is, she's got an unaccountable notion for another baby, Patsy, and I'm thinking we must be humouring her a bit, seeing as she isn't extra strong. So there's the truth of the matter for ye." "Of course, if mother wants a baby, I don't mind," conceded Pat. "Only," she added wistfully, "we're such a nice little family now, Judy. Just mother and daddy and Aunt Hazel and you and Winnie and Joe and Sid and me. I wish we could just stay like that forever." "I'm not saying it wouldn't be best. These afterthoughts do be a bit upsetting when you've been thinking a family's finished. But there it is. Nothing'll do your mother but a baby. So it's poor Judy Plum must get down on her stiff old marrow bones and see what's to be found in the parsley bed." "Are babies really found in parsley beds, Judy?" "Jen Foster says the doctor brings them in a black bag, and Ellen Price says a stork brings them, and Polly Gardner says old Granny Garland from the bridge brings them in her basket." "The things you youngsters do be talking of nowadays!" ejaculated Judy. "Ye've seen Dr. Bentley when he was here betimes. Did ye ever see him with any black bag?" "No." "And do there be any storks on P.E. Island?" Pat had never heard of any. "As for Granny Garland, I'm not saying she hasn't a baby or two stowed away in her basket now and again, but if she has, ye may risk content she found it in her own parsley bed. What of that? She doesn't pick the babies for the quality. You wouldn't want a baby of Granny Garland's choosing, would you now?" "Oh, no, but couldn't I help you look for it, Judy?" "Listen at her! It's little you know what ye do be talking about, dear child. It's only someone with a drop of witch blood in her like myself can see the little creatures and all, and it's all alone I must go at the rise of the moon in company with me cat. 'Tis a solemn performance, I'm telling ye, this finding of babies, and not to be lightly undertaken." Pat yielded with a sigh of disappointment. "You'll pick a pretty baby, won't you, Judy? A silver bush baby must be pretty." Oh, I'll do me best. You must remember that none of them are much to look at in the beginning, all crinkled and wrinkled just like the parsley leaves. And I'm telling you another thing. It's mostly the pretty babies that grow up to be the ugly girls. When I was a baby— Were you ever a baby, Judy? Pat found it hard to believe. It was preposterous to think of Judy Plum ever having been a baby. And could there ever have been a time when there was no Judy Plum? "I was that, and I was so handsome that the neighbours borrowed me to pass off as their own when company came. And look at me now. Just remember that if you don't think the baby I'll be finding is as good looking as you want. Of course I had the jandies when I was a slip of a girleen. It turned me as yellow as a brass cint. Me complexion has never been the same again." "But Judy, you're not ugly." "Maybe it's not so bad as that," said Judy cautiously. "But I wouldn't have picked this face if I could have had the picking. There now, I've finished me rose, and a beauty it is. I must be off to the milking. You'd better go and let that Thursday creature into the granary afore it breaks its heart, and don't be saying a word to anyone about this business of the parsley bed." "I won't, but, Judy, I've a kind of awful feeling in my stomach." Judy laughed. "The cleverness of the creature. I know what you do be hinting at. Well, After I'm finished with me cows, you might slip into the kitchen and I'll be frying ye an egg." "In butter, Judy?" "Sure, in butter. Lashings of it, enough to sop your bits of bread in the way you like, and I'm not saying but what there might be a cinnamon bun left over from supper." Judy, who never wore an apron, turned up her drugget skirt around her waist, showing her striped petticoat, and stalked downstairs, talking to herself as was her habit. Gentleman Tom followed her like a dark familiar. Pat uncoiled herself and went down to let Thursday into the granary. She still had a queer feeling, though she could not decide whether it was really in her stomach or not. The world all at once seemed a bit too big. This new baby was an upsetting sort of an idea. The Parsley bed had suddenly become a sinister sort of place. For a moment Pat was tempted to go to it and deliberately tear it all up by the roots. Judy wouldn't be able to find a baby in it then. But Mother wanted a baby. It would never do to disappoint Mother. "But I'll hate it," thought Pat passionately. "An outsider like that." If she could only talk it over with Sid, it would be a comfort. But she had promised Judy not to say a word to anybody about it. It was the first time she had ever had a secret from Sid, and it made her feel uncomfortable. Everything seemed to have changed a little in some strange fashion, and Pat hated change. Part 2. Half an hour later she had put the thought of it out of her mind and was in the garden bidding the flowers good night. Pat never omitted this ceremony. She was sure they would miss her if she forgot it. It was so beautiful in the garden, in the late twilight, with a silvery hint of moonrise over the hill of the mist, the trees around it, the old maples that grandmother gardener had planted when she came as a bride to Silver Bush, were talking to each other as they always did at night. 3 little birch trees that lived together in one corner were whispering secrets. The big crimson peonies were blots of darkness in the shadows. The bluebells along the path trembled with fairy laughter. Some late June lilies starred the grass at the foot of the garden. The columbines danced. The white lilac at the gate flung passing breaths of fragrance on the dewy air. The southern wood, Judy called it Lad's Love, which the little Quaker great-grand had brought with her from the old land 100 years ago, was still slightly aromatic. Pat ran about from plot to plot and kissed everything. Tuesday ran with her and writhed in furry ecstasy on the walks before her, walks that Judy had picked off with big stones from the shore, dazzlingly whitewashed. When Pat had kissed all her flowers good night, she stood for a little while looking at the house. How beautiful it was, nestled against its wooden hill, as if it had grown out of it. A house all white and green, just like its own silver birches, and now patterned over charmingly with trees' shadows cast by a moon that was floating over the hill of the mist. She always loved to stand outside of Silver Bush after dark and look at its lighted windows. There was a light in the kitchen where Sid was at his lessons, a light in the parlor where Winnie was practicing her music, a light up in Mother's room. A light for a moment flashed in the hall as somebody went upstairs, bringing out the fan window over the front door. "Oh, I've got such a lovely home," breathed Pat, clasping her hands. "It's such a nice, friendly house. Nobody has such a lovely home. I'd just like to hug it." Pat had her eggs in the kitchen with plenty of butter gravy, and then there was the final ceremony of putting a saucer of milk for the fairies on the well platform. Judy never omitted it. "There's no knowing what bad luck ye might be having if we forgot it. Sure, and we know how to trate fairies at Silver Bush." The fairies came by at night and drank it up. This was one of the things Pat was strongly inclined to believe. Hadn't Judy herself seen fairies dancing in a ring one night when she was a girleen in old Ireland? "But Joe says there are no fairies in P.E. Island," she said wistfully. "The things Joe do be saying make me sometimes think the bye don't be all there," said Judy indignantly. "Wasn't there folks coming out to P.E.I. from the old country for 100 years, me jewel? And don't ye be believin' there'd always be a fairy or two with a taste for a bit of adventure would stow himself away among their belongings and come too, and them never the bit wiser. And isn't the milk always gone by morning, I'm asking ye? Yes, it was. You couldn't get away from that. You're sure the cats don't drink it, Judy? Oh, cats, is it? There don't be much a cat wouldn't do if it took it into its head, I'm granting ye. But the boldest that ever lived wouldn't be daring to lap up the milk that was left for a fairy. That's the one thing no cat 'ud ever do. Be disrespectful to a fairy, and it'd be well for mortal creatures to follow his example. Couldn't we stay up some night, Judy, and watch? I'd love to see a fairy. Oh, sees it. Me jewel, ye can't see the fairies unless ye have the seeing eye. Ye'd see nothing at all, only just the milk drying up slowly as it were. Now be off to bed with ye, and mind you don't forget your prayers, or maybe you'll wake up and find something sitting on your bed in the night. I never do forget my prayers, said Pat with dignity. All the better for ye. I knew a little girl that forgot one night, and a banshee got hold of her. Oh, she was never the same again. What did the banshee do to her, Judy? Do to her, is it? It put a curse on her, that it did. Every time she tried to laugh, she cried, and every time she tried to cry, she laughed. Oh, 'twas a bitter punishment. Now, what's after plaguing ye? I can tell by the little face ye have yer ain't aisy. Judy, I keep thinking about that baby in the parsley bed. Don't you think they've got no baby over at Uncle Tom's? Couldn't you give it to them? Mother could see it as often as she wanted to. We're 4 of a family now. Oh, do you be thinking 4 is anything of a family to brag of? Why, your great-great-grandmother, old Mrs. Nehemiah, had 17 afore she called it a day, and 4 of them died in one night with the black cholera. Oh, Judy, how could she ever bear that? Sure, and hadn't she 13 left, me jewel? But they do say as she was never the same again. And now it's not telling ye again to go to bed, I'll be doing. Oh no, it's not telling. Part 3. Pat tiptoed upstairs, past the old grandfather clock on the landing that wouldn't go, hadn't gone for 40 years. The dead clock, she and Sid called it, but Judy always insisted that it told the right time twice a day. Then down the hall and into her room, with a wistful glance at the close-shut spare room door as she passed it. The poet's room it was called, because a poet who had been a guest at Silverbush had slept there for a night. Pat had a firm belief that if you could only open the door of any shut room quickly enough, you would catch all the furniture in strange situations. The chairs crowded together talking, the table lifting its white muslin skirts to show its pink sateen petticoat, the fire shovel and tongs dancing a fandango by themselves. But then you never could. Some sound always warned them, and they were back in their places as demure as you please. Pat said her prayers, "Now I lay me," and the Lord's Prayer, and then her own prayer. This was always the most interesting part because she made it up herself. She could not understand people who didn't like to pray. May Binney now. May had told her last Sunday in Sunday school that she never prayed unless she was scared about something. Fancy that! Pat prayed for everybody in the family, and for Judy Plum and Uncle Tom and Aunt Edith and Aunt Barbara, and for Sailor Uncle Horace at sea, and everybody else's Sailor Uncle at sea, and all the cats and Gentleman Tom and Joe's dog, little black Snickle Fritz with his curly tail, so that God wouldn't get mixed up between Joe's dog and Uncle Tom's dog, who was big and black with a straight tail, and any fairies that might be hanging around, and any poor ghosts that might be sitting on the tombstones, and for Silverbush itself. Dear Silverbush, please keep it always the same, dear God, begged Pat, and don't let any more trees blow down. Pat rose from her knees and stood there a bit rebelliously. Surely she had prayed for everybody and everything she could really be expected to pray for. Of course, on stormy nights she always prayed for people who might be out in the storm, but this was a lovely spring night. Finally she plumped down on her knees again. Please, dear God, if there is a baby out there in that parsley bed, keep it warm tonight. Dad says there may be a little frost.